Welcome to the program. I am your host, Andrew Wilkow. It is 8 o'clock here on the East Coast. It's Friday. We made it, but we're not going to go quietly into the weekend. You get an hour of perfectly executed political analysis. All right. You know that Biden gets confused from time to time. It seems like, though, the confusion might be contagious. Check out White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. She seems to have forgotten the darkest days in history.
On the eve ahead of January 6th, what we saw in 2011 on January 6th was an attack on our democracy.
2011? You know who doesn't forget the date in question? The people rotting in prison for what is otherwise a misdemeanor trespassing. My first guest is somebody who has just been released from prison. He's an Army Reserve veteran, Tim Hale. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Absolutely, sir. I don't want to be controversial. I think when 4,000 people died on D-Day, I think that was a dark day, but I don't know. 2011, sure.
Yeah, okay, 2011. Let's talk about this. You were charged with obstruction of an official proceeding. That's a 1512 violation. You sat in jail for 3 years, some of that time in solitary confinement. I don't know, how did you make the time go by when you had to know in your heart you were just basically at most trespassing?
Part of the way I passed the time is that before I was arrested, frankly, I think I was a full-time troll, a part-time soldier. I have a very strong will, and you really need that to get through solitary, even under normal circumstances. Solitary is not good for anybody, political prisoner or not. Fortunately, I was with a lot of good guys who were in similar circumstances. So over time, we kind of banded together. When I was a naval contractor, sir, I was actually a union rep. And one of the things I was good at was organizing people. So I actually wrote a constitution for the inmates there, so we could kind of tolerate each other and get through our differences. But it's not easy, even though you might think, well, you're just sitting around. That's actually not fun, just sitting around. But frankly, sir, conditions did improve over time with the DC jail. The real issues, unfortunately, are even worse than that. The entire Bill of Rights has been gutted. And no matter what anybody thinks about January 6th, and I don't think many people are proud of it, it's been used as a Trojan horse to create a lot of what should be horrific legal precedents for American citizens, because what happens to us today could happen to the left tomorrow. So the First Amendment, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth, the Eighth, the 14th Amendment, a lot of horrible precedents were created by January 6th, and they weren't actually created on January 6th, but rather in the Inquisition that followed it. So I hope Americans. Go ahead, sir.
Let me ask you something. Why did they put you in solitary confinement? What warranted that?
Well, initially they were doing it to anybody they ended up bringing to the jail in Washington, D.C. Eventually, most people got bonded out, and it was only roughly 30 to 40 people that stayed in the D.C. jail. I got a frame job as being a right-wing extremist or something like that. And fortunately, now that I'm finally out, it's a shame I had to serve a whole sentence to do it, I can actually go through the discovery. And on my Twitter account, I'm actually releasing all the evidence showing that the government lied about me. But this is not just about me, though. You have, unfortunately, over 1,000 people have been charged, and not just in the DC jail. You actually still have hundreds of people who are detained in jail waiting trial or even in prison. And so a lot of men are languishing, and they've never had a true defense. This is why what's going on with Trump is really horrific. He's not going to get a fair shot in Washington, D.C. They're not going to give him a change of venue. They didn't give us a change of venue. My greatest regret isn't that I lost 2 years of my life. It's that I was used as a weapon against President Trump, because they're doing the same thing to us.
President Trump isn't charged with any crime that would bar him from office. That would be 18 U.S.C. 2383, the Rebellion and Insurrection Act. He's got the same charge you got. So let me ask the obvious question. Were you, Tim Hale, part of a pre-planned plot to go to the Capitol and overthrow the government of the United States?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, I didn't know going to Washington, D.C., that there was going to be anything happening at the Capitol. I was finally able to pull video off my phone of me at the ellipse, and you can just watch people calmly walking, meandering from the ellipse in the Washington Monument area, I guess that's where it is, where the Trump speech was happening. And they just calmly walk down the street to get to the Capitol building. People didn't know that was going to happen. I just went there for a Trump speech. I went kind of like I am now. I was there in a suit and a tie. I just gotten off my overnight shift as a contractor. You know, I wasn't expecting any of that to happen. And let's be fair, if you had watched the previous Stop the Steal rallies in the months before, why would you expect otherwise? You know, so what happened, unfortunately, is that a half hour before I showed up to the Capitol, people knocked over barriers. And I didn't know that. Nobody knew that, you know, except the people who were with Ray Epps. And so when you wander into this restricted area, the Capitol Police and Metro PD, they don't warn you. They just start shooting rubber bullets and flashbangs into the crowd. And this incited people. And there were agitators. There were feds there. And I'm trying to release like I said, on my Twitter account, I'm trying to release some of the video. I think I'm releasing more video than Speaker Johnson. But what we have is that so many people walked into a trap, and they weren't there for the wrong reasons. They were just there to protest. And again, on my video,
No, let me jump in and say this. Hold on. Let me jump in and say this.
Sure.
There's no right or wrong reason. You can exercise your First Amendment rights. There's no right. You don't have to have a good reason to assemble peaceably. You don't have to have a good reason to speak your mind. You don't have to have a good reason to go to D.C. and stand in front of a building and look around. That's your right as a citizen. I've got less than a minute. Were you confronted by any Capitol Police? I mean, were you picked up by the FBI, or were you arrested that day? I got 30 seconds.
No, I was actually picked up in my home after NCIS was. They basically had my roommate wear a wire to entrap me. So that happened January 15th, about a week later. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, funny enough, I was in jail with a guy who was arrested inside the Capitol building that day, given a misdemeanor and sent on his way. And then they raided him in Florida a week later. You know, look, some stuff happened that day that should not have happened. But what people need to realize is that there was entrapment. Some of the defendants I was in the DC jail with were not real defendants, and they were not real Trump supporters, and they confessed that they were
I'm
there.
going to have to leave it there. I'm going to have to leave it there. I'm going to get your story in full on my radio program, but I got to leave it here for now. Thank you for joining us. My argument's next.